Syos, shape your own sound. Welcome to the second season of Syos Rendez-vous, the podcast for curious musicians. In each episode, we invite artists and professionals from the world of music and sound to discuss and answer the daily questions of instrumentalists and share experiences and anecdotes. If you want to know more about your instrument, if you want to progress at the speed of ultrasound, or if you want to know everything about the music business to launch your career, you have come to the right place. Our podcasts are available on all streaming platforms. Feel free to listen to them, support them with a like, and reshare them. Hi, I'm Sylvie from Syos, and today in this podcast we are going to talk about saxophone learning. Do you ever wonder how you can improve your playing or who or what to turn to? Would you like to know how the instrument is taught on the other side of the Atlantic? Then you're on the right podcast. Today we have the chance to welcome musician and saxophone teacher Rick Margitza in our studio. Born in Detroit in the United States, he has released many records on Blue Note, Challenge Records, or more recently Lecoq Records, and he has played with musicians such as Miles Davis, Chick Corea, Eddie Gomez, Tony Williams, and many, many others. Rick has been living in Paris for the last 18 years, and he's a saxophone and arranging teacher at the IMEP, the Paris College of Music. Today with him, we are going to see how the teaching of the saxophone was born and how it has evolved through time and countries. But first, let's go down to the studio to find Rick. Hi, Rick. Thanks so much for coming in and answering our question for our podcast.
Hi, Sylvie. My pleasure.
Thank you. So we've introduced you briefly, but can you tell us a little bit more about your background as a musician and a teacher?
Yes, I was born into a musical family. Our heritage is Hungarian and Czechoslovakian gypsy, je suis giton. So there is music everywhere. My father's a classical violinist. His father was a Hungarian gypsy folk violinist, and my grandfather on my mother's side was a jazz bass player. So he played big bass with big bands like Glenn Miller and some other big bands during that era, and he also played cello on Charlie Parker with strings recordings.
Nice.
So I grew up hearing jazz, classical music, and folk music in my house. And also, my father also played violin on a lot of the Motown recordings because he was part of this group of string players that was involved in those recordings. So I also heard all this amazing soul and R&B music. So I kind of didn't have a chance or a choice. So I became a musician just because I grew up hearing and loved it.
What did you brought to the saxophone, as all our family is playing chords? I mean, strings.
Everybody. It's either violins or drums or bass. There are very few horn players, but my mother actually asked me, do I want to hear my grandfather play the cello? So she put on Charlie Parker with strings recording, and when I heard that, that's kind of what did it for me. I also had a cousin who was a little older than me who played me some Michael Brecker at the time, the Brecker brothers, and also a saxophone player named Jerry Nywood who used to play with Chuck Mangione. So I was hearing some saxophone players from various sources at about, I was maybe 10 or 11 years old. So, I went to school and, you had to play clarinet before you played the saxophone. So I played clarinet for about a year, and then I switched to the alto whenever I was, as soon as I was able to.
Okay. You never played violin or cello?
I did play violin when I was really young, like 4 or 5 years old. My grandfather used to teach me some old Hungarian folk songs, just like that. And I did study classical piano for a while. Okay. But like I said, once I heard Charlie Parker and those other guys, it kind of did it for me.
Okay, you were lost for the strings. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
So we're going back to the saxophone history. So the saxophone is a relatively new instrument compared to the other wind instruments, like flute or clarinet. It was invented by Adolphe Sax in 1840. And this very innovative engineer also invented other instruments like the steam organ or many other wind instruments, very weird and strange. But also he invented medical devices and even a cannon, the saxo cannon. I don't know. There is no picture of that, but it seems it has existing.
Wow.
So thank you, Adolphe.
There's an amazing book about him called The Devil's Horn, about the saxophone, and it goes into a lot of his history. But it doesn't mention the saxo cannon. It mentions a lot of other crazy things that he did. I mean, what a fascinating spirit he was. Anyway.
Yeah, so I don't know about the cannon. Maybe it's a legend. And so to come back to the saxophone, so it was very hard at the beginning. I mean, the arrival of the instrument created a lot of the discord, making the established instrument makers jealous of Adolphe Sax because of this wonderful instrument. And it also created small wars between musicians and composers. And so as a result, the repertoire was very little, and the saxophone didn't find its place in orchestras. Do you think there are other reasons why the saxophone was not played more in the 19th century? Like the composers, musicians, the wars, is there anything that...
I think it was just, like many things, people were afraid of new ideas, and they want to hold on to their traditions and feel safe. So I think that was maybe part of it. This is a big subject to open up, but I think as we've evolved, we've become more open to new things. So maybe back then things were a little bit more small. Not to say that there aren't a lot of closed-minded people these days, but it seems like the global community is bigger and there are more people trying different things. So, there was just such a huge orchestral tradition that was established up until that point. To try to break with those norms at that point was, I can imagine, very
hard.
Very hard, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So maybe that's why the saxophone took its credential with jazz. Maybe because jazz was a new thing and it could incorporate the saxophone.
It could be, yeah. And it could be that a lot of composers also did not really know that much about the instrument, so there could have been some type of fear, or what's another word for it? Fear of the unknown.
Yeah. I read that a composer wrote a piece for saxophone and then gave it to the main clarinet player at the orchestra. And the guy who didn't like Adolphe Sax, who was friend with another instrument maker, said, "No, I'm not going to play saxophone. Please rewrite this part for a clarinet." And so, I mean, I think there were some things like that. And
yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, but good for jazz.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now I would like to talk with you about something really strange that is happening here in France. We noticed that a lot of young musicians start the saxophone with a classical training and then switch to jazz when they are like teenager or older. And so about that, we are going to listening to Bruno.
Okay.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Bruno Miller.
Hi, my name is Bruno Miller. I'm 18 years old and I've been playing the saxophone for 9 years, so just the half of my life. I started with a classical teacher, even though I always knew I wanted to play jazz. After a while in classical, I wasn't playing pieces that I knew or that particularly motivated me. And then I changed teacher to take a teacher not only specific to jazz, but also to improvisation. And so it's been 5 years now that with this teacher, once a week, I have a class and that I work regularly on jazz and on improvisation.
En jazz et en impro.
So why do you think this thing is happening? Why do they start with classical to switch to jazz? Why couldn't we start directly with jazz?
Because I think it's important to have control of the technique of the instrument. because I started playing. Well, I had basically, like I said, some training on the clarinet in my high school, in my junior high school. So I learned the basics of just how to blow and stuff, but I didn't really know that much about breathing and proper technique. But when I got, excuse me, when I got my saxophone, I was just playing along with records. That's kind of how I learned to play jazz at first.
Mm-hmm.
But at some point, my father was helpful in this because, Bolero was one of the pieces that they always use a saxophone on in the orchestra. So my father is aware of this amazing saxophone teacher at the University of Michigan named Donald Sinta, who's like one of the main classical teachers in the world at that point. He was a direct descendant of Larry Teal, who wrote The Art of Saxophone Playing. So anyway, my father, being in the classical world, said, I think it would be a good idea for you to take lessons with this man just to learn how to play the instrument. So, of course, the concept of sound between a classical teacher and a jazz teacher is very different, and between just the classical saxophone repertoire and jazz. So the thing is, when I went to this teacher, I wasn't going to him, and I told him I don't want to become a classical saxophone player, because at that point he would have changed my mouthpiece and talked about sound in a different way. But I said, I want to learn how to play the instrument properly. So he helped me with my breathing and what to do with my throat position for altissimo and how to develop proper technique. So it was more mechanical, but in a really helpful way that gave me more tools to bring to the jazz world, because then I was able to, as I say, you always have to be able to play what you hear. So if I hear something but I can't execute it because I don't have the proper technique, then that's a problem. So you have to be able to play your instrument and really control it so you can express whatever you want to express. So to answer your question, I'm not sure why a lot of these people, if they go to classical teachers with this idea of wanting to play jazz, or maybe they get into the classical world and they're kind of turned off by it for some reason, I don't know what it might be, and then they decide to switch afterwards. So it depends on what their objective is.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, for myself, I started saxophone with a classical teacher as well, and then I switched to jazz when I was a teenager. So yeah, I don't know. It's maybe the system here in France, but I have a question. Like, so don't you think that we can get all what you described about like knowing the instrument and knowing how to play with a jazz teacher? Like, for example, you take, I don't know, a lesson with Chris Potter. Like, wouldn't that work? I think he would be able to bring all of that as well, no?
Of course, yeah. It depends on who the person is. So when I have students come to me, I might notice that something is deficient in their technique, or I could see that they're not breathing properly, or if they're having problems with the altissimo, I could tell them what exercises to do to develop that stuff. So absolutely. But maybe, it, like I said, it depends on the teacher. There may have been some teachers, like I remember some guys in Detroit who were amazing players but didn't even know what they were doing, because they were kind of just learning on the streets, and they couldn't even explain the theory of what they were doing, but they were great, but they were just playing by ear.
Okay.
So certain teachers might not have the capacity to really technically guide a student.
I see, yeah.
So, but yes, I mean, I would imagine that if somebody wants to play jazz, they kind of know right from the beginning, and you can just go to a jazz teacher who knows his stuff. Unless these people are going to classical teachers and then being turned off by the attitude, and then they find jazz. It depends on what makes them want to change.
Yeah, okay. That sounds logical. Yeah. Is it the same in the States?
I speak from a limited perspective, so I could only say that a friend of mine who's a student of Donald Sinta as well, he's younger than me, but he took over his position when he retired. So his name is Tim McAllister, and he's had concertos written by John Adams, by John Corigliano. Like, he's commissioned several really amazing, famous classical composers. So the repertoire for the saxophone is expanded greatly because of him. So the people that go study with him at the University of Michigan are going there because they want to study with this guy because they want to play classical saxophone. So when I've talked to him, he's never said that like people are coming to him and then switching to jazz. So in that case, I know that it's not happening, but it could be happening other places. So not that I'm aware of, but possibly.
Okay. Okay, so now we are going to listen to Nicholas. He's a clarinet teacher. So he started to play the clarinet and then teach the clarinet, and now he's studying saxophone.
Alors le saxophone, moi c'est un instrument.
So the saxophone is an instrument that I learned by myself. You have to know that my universe is the clarinet. I have been a teacher for about 15 years now. I did my musical studies on this instrument, and 4 or 5 years ago I happened to have a saxophone box with my sister's first alto saxophone that my parents had not sold. And so this first saxophone, I kept it saying to myself, maybe one day I'll blow in it. And that's what I did 4 or 5 years ago on a piece by trumpeter Freddie Hubbard called Gibraltar. It was immediately a real crush. I took it to play with my jazz friends and I liked it. I had to work a lot because it's not the same way of picking and the way of centering the notes. The keys also are different from a clarinet, so it's a long way to go from clarinet to saxophone, but it's very nice.
Donc, voilà, c'est un chemin quand même pour passer de la clarinette au saxophone.
So you told us earlier that you yourself switch from clarinet to saxophone. Do you have students that do that, or do you know, like you have colleagues that, is it a common path to switch from clarinet to saxophone?
I think it was some time ago, maybe not as much these days, but it could be happening. And once again, I'm not aware of it. But I know in the school system in the States, for some reason, and well, I can only speak also for Michigan. I don't know where it was other places, but it could have also been related to money, because our school only had like 5 or 6 saxophones, but they had maybe 20 clarinets because they're less expensive. So maybe other people also wanted to play saxophone, but they couldn't because they weren't available. So the rule was you have to play clarinet for a year.
Okay.
So
and if you're consistent, maybe you can play saxophone.
Yeah.
That's the reward?
That's the reward. Yeah. And at that point, I don't remember too many people then like coming in with their own saxophones, which could have been a solution if they couldn't get one through the school. I think at that point you had to study the clarinet first.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but I think it's good now to start with the clarinet because of the technical stuff. And I heard that good clarinet players were making like very, very good sax players.
Yes. To me, the clarinet is much more difficult than the saxophone. So I imagine that the discipline of learning that could only make the saxophone better, your saxophone playing better. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine playing saxophone first, then trying to learn the clarinet. The opposite would be really difficult.
I tried. It was terrible. I gave up.
It's a disaster. Yeah.
Okay, but do you still play clarinet?
No. It's to do it properly. It's really difficult, and there was at some point when I was, because the objective of a lot of people when you're coming from other smaller cities is to eventually end up in New York. And one of the main ways people make money in New York is if you're playing any of the one of the Broadway shows in one of the pit orchestras, right? Mm-hmm. So at that point, if you're going to be a Broadway musician, as a woodwind player, you have to double. So that means you have to play flute and clarinet, at least. And then some people play oboe and other types of flutes, or even bassoon maybe. And when I was thinking about going to New York, and I thought about the time involved with learning 3 instruments, and every time, even when I was kind of interested in the flute, but not the clarinet that much. And every time I was practicing the flute, I was thinking I could be practicing the saxophone instead. So I made a decision. I said, okay, I know limiting the amount of work that I could get because I won't ever be able to do any of the Broadway shows, but I decided to not double.
Okay.
So I gave up a while ago. So it's been years since I played the clarinet. I think if a flute is around, I can still pick it up and play it a little bit, but the clarinet is not like that. It's
It's
very
another
unforgiving. So
another animal.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the Broadway shows, and is there something like, because now we see a lot of tenor player that play also a bass clarinet. He's the why is it about the sound, like, or the keys are the same on bass and B flat?
The keys, yeah.
But on the embouchure, maybe the bass clarinet is easier than B flat.
I think it's a little less forgiving.
Oh, okay.
No, more forgiving.
Yeah, more
It's
forgiving.
easier to play than the normal clarinet, I think. Not that it's easy, but easier.
Yeah.
And it also is a little bit of the same range as the tenor.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, maybe in another life. So, could you tell me, like, how do you teach the saxophone? Do you have particular methods? And could you explain a little bit your?
Sure. Well, of course it depends on the level of the student. So these days, what I try to do is I ask, if somebody approaches me for a lesson, I ask them to send me a recording or a video of them playing, because then it's easier for me to assess where to start with them, as opposed to us getting in a room together, because of course they're going to be nervous. And I ask them to play with a play-along record or something like that. It's not going to be a complete, true representation of what they could do. So if I have a video or a recording of them playing when they're out just jamming or something, where they're not worried about me listening to them, I get a better idea of where they are. And once I hear them, I could say, okay, this guy can play the saxophone, so we could talk more about just music and conception and improvisation, theory, harmony. But they might be doing some things where their intonation is not right, or they're using too much vibrato or too much scooping, or you could tell that they haven't really incorporated the altissimo into the horn, into their playing. So at that point, then I realized they need more technical work as opposed to creative work.
Okay.
And for me, it's much more difficult to teach the mechanics. Like certain people are much better at teaching people how to play the saxophone. For me, I enjoy and I'm much better at teaching people how to be creative and develop some type of conception. So when somebody comes to me and doesn't know how to play the saxophone, I can just point them in the right direction, but it's difficult for me to maintain that kind of relationship over the course of a couple months because I've run out of things to say.
Yeah, like long tones and scales.
Like it's pretty obvious, and then now just go practice for a year and then come back to me when you have more control of the instrument. But there are some guys who are great at more mechanical things. Like, for example, some people ask me what I'm doing with my tongue in terms of my sound. Not tonguing, but just where is my tongue when I'm playing the altissimo register? Where's my tongue when I'm playing in the low register? And I really don't know.
Yeah, that's...
But you could ask Dave Liebman that, and he'll tell you exactly where your tongue should be, for example. So
okay.
So it's a kind of a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
When somebody comes to me for a lesson or something.
So for the students who are listening to us, or I think we are all students, would you have some advices how to choose a teacher? Like, you don't know, you play, you don't know you want a teacher, but how to choose the right one?
That's really a good question. That's like asking, how do you find a good therapist?
All right, we're getting there.
Sometimes you don't know until 3 or 4 sessions in whether this guy is good or not, whether you feel comfortable. So it is trial and error. And sometimes you just get lucky and find the right fit right at the beginning or not. So I would say be careful. If you're with somebody and it doesn't feel right, it's okay to stop studying with them and look for somebody else that you feel comfortable with. Obviously, if you're looking for a teacher and you can go hear them play, or they've had recordings and you like what they do, that's a good start. It's like, I like what this guy does. I want to know how he does that, or what he did to get to that point. So that is some criteria that will help. Of course, you could ask other saxophone players, who did you study with? Who could you recommend? Word of mouth. So there are different ways to go about it.
Okay. Yeah. Do you still have a teacher?
Do I have a teacher?
A master, maybe?
I have many. Coltrane, Sonny Rollins, Joe Henderson. So yeah, most of my teachers are all the people we love, and it's the recordings.
What do you do? Do you transcribe?
I don't transcribe as much anymore, but yeah, there might be a phrase that I transcribe and say I hear and say I want to know what that is. But it's more about just listening to their recordings and being inspired by their spirit. I mean, maybe that sounds a little too...
No, we need the spirit.
Yeah.
The world is crumbling, so the spirit, maybe will save us. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not very practical in terms of like concrete advice, but they're masters in the sense that when I put Coltrane on, I feel better and I feel inspired, and it makes me want to practice. And yeah, so that's kind of more master in terms of just inspiration. And whenever I get around Dave Liebman, because he's one of the few masters that are still kind of out there and available. That generation is getting older, and we're losing a lot of people. So he's one of them, and I call him Yoda, because he's like the wise old sage. And there's always something about just being around him that's really inspiring. His energy and his enthusiasm. And there were several master classes online of his that you can go on YouTube and watch. That's one good thing. One of the amazing things about the internet is that you can go on YouTube and watch these guys teach. And so I would recommend, if you can, anything Dave Liebman masterclass on YouTube, just watch. Because, of course, it's not the same as being there in the room with him, but you could get a lot of information just by watching him teach.
So you're doing a very good switch, because I wanted to ask you about what do you think about like all the tuto videos we can find on YouTube, or all the the master classes, or there are some PDFs or package. Like what do you think about the new methods? Like,
it's a little overwhelming because there's so much out there now. But it's extraordinary. I remember, when I was growing up, when I wanted to transcribe, I had to put the record player on my vinyl and put it on 16 instead of 33. So we'd be listening to everything at half speed. And now you have things on your phone that you could transcribe and transpose anything instantly. So it's pretty extraordinary what you could do. And of course, the resources that are available online, a lot of them are free. Some you pay for a subscription, and then you have access to all their information and all their content. It still doesn't replace being in the room live with somebody, just one-on-one. But there's still so much to be gained just by everything that's available. I watched the interview of Pat Metheny. There's like an hour-long interview of him. So it wasn't about saxophone, but just hearing him talk about his career and what inspired him as a musician and what he does when he composes was invaluable. So there's so much, it's really easy to get lost on it, but it's really inspiring. But like I said, it's overwhelming.
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, how do you do to be not overwhelmed?
I don't know. I also, me in general, I have problems with making choices. Because, my sign is Libra. So it's about balance. So I always, when I make a choice, it's like, but I could have chosen this instead. So, so I have a particular problem with that. I don't know. Excuse me, I could be watching a video on YouTube and scrolling down the side to see other videos, and I'm already thinking about watching this before I even finish watching that. It's like you go down that rabbit hole. It's
Okay, so to the young students, don't listen to Rick. So thank you very much, Rick, for coming.
oh, my pleasure.
Thank you for your
asking
time.
me.
Yeah, sure. It's always a pleasure. I've heard you are writing a book, or?
Yes, I started this was January 2020, so it was before the lockdown, before COVID, and I was visiting my parents in the States for the holidays, and I don't know why. It could have been that the night before I was watching a video on YouTube, and it was a Buddhist monk giving a lecture about projects and establishing goals and finishing projects. So that was the seed, I guess, that was planted. And I had been watching people do this thing called 100 days of practice, or 100 days of something, meditating or whatever. So anyway, I got up on New Year's Day and I said, I'm going to post one idea every day for a year.
One musical idea.
One musical idea. And once I started, I thought to myself, I should have just done 100 days of ideas instead of 365. I said, but if I stop now, that will be so lame. So I have to finish it. I have to follow it through. So, I was, and of course COVID hit, so it became something that took some time in a good way, and I got a lot of positive feedback from people who were like looking forward to these every day. So it helped some people. I'm not saying it helped them get through the pandemic, but there was a little bit of something during the day that they were looking forward to. Mm-hmm. So I was just posting, and what made it easy is it was not structured. So the first day could have been a 2-5-1, just a 4-measure idea. The next day could have been something technical to practice, so it was more about how to practice scales. Third day could have been an idea based off the melodic minor scale. So I was just jumping around, going into my notebook and posting these ideas. And I did it for the year. And many people said you should turn this into a book, which I started doing.
Okay.
So I'm finished with round 1, and round 1 was recording all of them. And also creating backing tracks. So I had to create 365 backing tracks so people could hear what the idea sounds like over a rhythm section.
Okay. So they could practice with it as well, or?
Well, they could, so the format is going to be the backing track once by itself and then once with me. Or maybe once with me first and then once without me, so they could try it without me being in their way. Mm-hmm. So in the course of doing this, I changed some keys. I changed a couple of the ideas. So now round 2 is to go back and change all the text and re-enter all the corrections. And in round 3 is to proofread all of that. So I'm a little overwhelmed once again by all the work I have to do because the first round took a lot of time. But I think that might have been the hardest round. But so anyway, I'm taking a little break.
Okay.
But I think this summer I'm going to get back on it, and hopefully within 6 months or so it could be finished.
Yeah.
And then the next thing is how do we market it and how do we get it out there and all that stuff, which I'm also not good about. So
okay, I'm sure you will find people to.
I'll find people to help me.
Of course. You also have Instagram and Facebook, so you can advertise and.
Yes, that's at this point I don't have a website. For whatever reason, that never happened, but I'm going to put one up once the book is finished. But Instagram, Facebook page. And I'd like to mention that we play at a place called Le Gare every Monday here in Paris. And that's been going on for maybe 3 or 4 years now. And it's turned into a really amazing outlet for me and for the band that I play with. And we are pre-recording this, so hopefully by the time this is airing, we'll still be there. As of now, they tell us it's ours forever. So
great. I really encourage everyone who is in Paris or who comes to Paris to go to La Gare. It's Corentin Cariou in the north of Paris, and they play at 8:30, 9:30 p.m. and it's every Monday. It's amazing.
Thank you.
And but thanks again for
My
your
pleasure.
time.
Thanks for asking me.
That was great
Nice
to
be
have
here.
you, and hope to see you in concert soon and to have your book and practice again.
Great. Thanks, Sylvie.
Thank you very much, Rick. Thank you. And thank you to all our listeners. You can listen to this podcast again on all streaming platforms. You will also find all our other Syos podcasts. So please don't hesitate to leave us comments, to like them or to share them. You can also write to us on Instagram, TikTok, and on Facebook at Syos Music. And if you want to learn more about saxophone and clarinet, as well as to discover our mouthpieces selection, I suggest you visit our website www.syos.co. Thank you very much again and see you soon.